In the hush of night, beneath quiet skies, exists a hidden world of mystical energy and spirits. In this world, negative human emotions, fear, grief, anger, and hate, give birth to a mysterious power known as cursed energy. This energy seeps out of people unknowingly, and when left to fester, it forms malevolent beings called cursed spirits, the living embodiment of humanity's nightmares. To protect the innocent from these unseen horrors, a secret society of jujutsu sorcerers trains to control cursed energy, using it to exorcise curses and maintain balance in the world. It is a dangerous calling, one passed down through generations, often within esteemed clans of sorcerers. Among these sorcerers, one name shines brighter than any other: Satoru Gojo, a man fated to become the strongest jujutsu sorcerer of his time. Gojo's story begins quietly, like a breeze before a storm. Born into the respected Gojo clan, Satoru's birth was anything but ordinary. He inherited the clan's treasured cursed technique, Limitless, which grants the ability to manipulate space at will, essentially bringing the concept of infinity into reality. What truly set Satoru apart, however, was that he was also born with the six eyes, a rare ocular power that blessed him with extraordinary perception of cursed energy. This unique combination of powers had not been seen in 400 years. From the moment baby Satoru opened his eyes, bright blue and aglow with the six eyes' insight, the very balance of the jujutsu world shifted in response. Some whispered that the cosmos had gifted him these powers for a reason. Others, especially the enemies of sorcerers, felt a tremor of fear. Satoru Gojo, from his first days, carried the weight of destiny on his small shoulders. Growing up with such immense potential was both a blessing and a burden for young Satoru. On one hand, he was cherished by his family's elders as the heir to their formidable techniques. On the other, there were those in the shadows who sought to challenge or even harm him, hoping to snuff out this brilliant light before it could fully shine. Yet even as a child, Satoru was uncannily aware and powerful. It said that when he was only a little boy, assassins placed bounties on him, only to find themselves utterly outmatched by the child they hunted. There is a quiet legend that a notorious assassin once trailed the young Gojo from afar, hidden by stealth and devoid of any cursed energy, and somehow the child still sensed the watcher's presence, turning his head with innocent curiosity as if to meet the assassin's gaze. Such was the intuition granted by the six eyes. From his earliest days, Satoru lived in a paradox, never truly in danger, yet never truly at peace either, for the weight of being the strongest was already beginning to settle on him. Despite the solitude that such power could bring, Satoru did have a childhood filled with moments of warmth and normalcy. He laughed, played, and learned like any other boy when he could, and those who cared for him ensured he had as ordinary an upbringing as possible. But by the time he was a teenager, it was clear that Gojo Satoru was anything but ordinary. With his unrivaled gifts, he enrolled at Tokyo Jujutsu High, the premier school for training sorcerers, where young talents are molded to fight curses. It was the beginning of a journey that would test not only his strength, but also his heart and ideals. In this tranquil retelling, we will follow Satoru Gojo's path, from his youth and friendships to the battles that forged his legend, all told gently. As a midnight story to ease the mind, let us walk alongside the strongest sorcerer in the quiet of night, and witness the entire story of Gojo, told softly, to help you drift into peaceful sleep. Satoru Gojo's days as a student at Tokyo Jujutsu High were filled with the vibrant energy of youth and the quiet burdens of greatness. As a second-year student, Satoru was brimming with confidence, some might even say overconfidence. Thanks to his unmatched abilities, he often wore a carefree smile and a strip of black cloth tied around his eyes as a blindfold, hiding the brilliant gaze of the six eyes beneath. Despite the covering, nothing escaped Satoru's notice. The six eyes allowed him to perceive the world's flow of cursed energy and exquisite detail, even without sight. This gave every movement he made an easy grace, as if he were always one step ahead. His fellow students sometimes joked that Gojo could probably fight with his eyes closed, and in truth, he often did exactly that, turning combat into a casual affair. Yet, even the strongest student is still a teenager at heart. Satoru bonded with his classmates, formed friendships, and got into the sort of mischief that only sorcerer trainees can. His best friend was Suguru Geto, another exceptionally talented student in his year. Suguru had a calm, thoughtful demeanor and a gentle smile. He hailed from a normal family but possessed a rare technique that allowed him to absorb and control cursed spirits. Satoru and Suguru were a legendary duo in school, Gojo and Geto, often spoken of together as if they were two sides of the same coin. They would train together, spar together, and sometimes bicker about their differing philosophies, only to laugh it off moments later. Alongside them was Shoko Ieri, a quiet, caring student who excelled at healing techniques. The trio of friends spent many afternoons on the school grounds, under the warm sun, chatting about everything from combat tactics to silly teenage topics. In those moments, Satoru wasn't the exalted prodigy or the heir of the Gojo clan. He was just a boy joking with his friends, enjoying the precious, ordinary joys of youth. But fate rarely allows prodigies to remain in peace for long. During Satoru and Suguru's second year, a grave mission was entrusted to them, one that would forever change their lives. The elders summoned Gojo and Geto, informing them of a critical task from Master Tengen, the immortal sorcerer who maintains the barriers protecting the Jujutsu world. They were to escort a young girl, Riko Amanai, who had been chosen as the next star plasma vessel. Little Riko was to merge with Master Tengen in a ritual that occurred only once in several centuries, a process necessary to keep Tengen's powers stable. It was a heavy destiny for a schoolgirl to bear. Satoru, with his usual bravado, accepted the mission confidently, teasing Suguru that it would be an easy payday. Yet both young sorcerers understood the stakes. If they failed to protect Riko, Master Tengen's power could spiral out of control, throwing the Jujutsu world into chaos. On a gentle morning, Satoru and Suguru met Riko Amanai and her caretaker, Misato Kuroi, at a high-rise building where Riko was hiding for safety. Riko was just a child, cheerful, a bit stubborn, and surprisingly accepting of the fate that awaited her. She greeted her sorcerer bodyguards with a bright smile, immediately giving Satoru a playful nickname and insisting that they follow her whims for the day. Despite the life-or-death mission, Gojo found himself charmed by Riko's innocent enthusiasm. How often, he mused, do sorcerers get to protect someone in such a direct, personal way? Usually they fought unseen curses, but here they were guarding a living person, a young girl with hopes and dreams. Satoru took that responsibility to heart, perhaps more than he let on with his jokes. Their journey to escort Riko to Jujutsu High was not a straight path. Riko had one request before she gave up her normal life to merge with Master Tengen. She wanted one last day to be a regular teenager. Warmed by her courage and innocence, Satoru and Suguru agreed. They took Riko back to her school so she could attend class and say goodbye to her friends. The trio guarded her quietly from the shadows as she laughed with her classmates, soaking in those final moments of an ordinary life. It was a peaceful interlude. Gojo, the strongest sorcerer in training, carrying a stack of juice boxes Riko wanted, and Geto holding her stuffed backpack, acting less like bodyguards and more like two big brothers taking their little sister on an outing. They even went to the aquarium together at Riko's request, walking amidst tanks of serene blue water and shimmering fish. Satoru strolled casually with his hands in his pockets, blindfold securely on, describing the fish out loud for Riko's amusement as if he could see them, and in truth, With his 6 eyes he sensed everything in the room clearly. Suguru chuckled at the sight. Gojo Satoru, untouchable sorcerer, narrating fun facts about jellyfish in a soft, patient tone to keep a child happy. Yet even as they enjoyed these moments, danger loomed unseen. A group of fanatics and curse users strongly opposed to the merger had placed a bounty on Reko's head. Chief among these was the organization called the Time Vessel Association, extremists who believed Reko should not be allowed to fuse with Tenjin. They hired an infamous assassin to stop the merger, a man whose skills were so formidable, even the Jujutsu world spoke his name in wary tones. This man was Toji Fushiguro, also known as the Sorcerer Killer. Unbeknownst to Satoru and Suguru, Toji was already watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came when Satoru, Suguru, and Riko finally arrived at the safety of Jujutsu High's gates. The sun cast long afternoon shadows as they entered a quiet chapel on campus, a place prepared for Riko's handover to Master Tengen's aides. Riko hesitated at the threshold. Was she truly ready to give up her life and identity? In that fragile moment, Satoru did something unexpected. He knelt down, placed a gentle hand on Riko's shoulder, and told her she had a choice. With a kind smile, he reassured her that it was okay if she wanted to live her own life a little longer. His voice was soft and encouraging, a tone he rarely used. Suguru stood by, surprised but supportive. He too had grown fond of the girl, and believed no one, not even a chosen vessel, should be forced into fate without consent. Riko looked at these two sorcerers, her protectors who had become her friends, and tears of relief filled her eyes. She made her decision. She would not merge with Tengen now. She would return with them and choose her own path, if only for a short while more. In that tender, hopeful moment, tragedy struck with a cruel swiftness. A sharp gunshot echoed through the chapel. In an instant, Riko's small hand, which had been clasped in Gojo's, went limp. Satoru's heart dropped as he caught her collapsing body. Time seemed to slow as he lowered her gently to the ground, his mind reeling in horror and disbelief. Riko Amanai, the bright, brave girl they had sworn to protect, had been shot and killed before their eyes. Satoru's breath caught. A heavy silence filled the air of the chapel, broken only by the distant caw of a crow outside. For a moment, Gojo Satoru, the invincible prodigy, knelt utterly still, cradling Riko's lifeless form. Suguru's eyes widened in shock, his hands trembling as anger and sorrow flooded him. The light that was Riko had been snuffed out in a heartbeat, and their mission had failed at the final step. Standing in the dim light atop the chapel's balcony was the culprit, Toji Fushiguro, calmly lowering a smoking rifle. The sorcerer killer had made his lethal move. Rage and grief erupted in Satoru's chest, like an inferno, but he fought to stay calm. He gently laid Riko's body in Suguru's shaking arms, wordlessly telling his friend to take care of her. Then Satoru tilted his head up toward the balcony, his blindfolded gaze fixed on the silhouette of Toji Fushiguro. In a low, icy voice that hardly sounded like his own, Gojo uttered a challenge into the silence. Without hesitation, he stepped forward to face the assassin, signaling for Suguru to stay back. Suguru, torn between wanting revenge and trusting his friend, obeyed and retreated with Riko's body, his eyes filled with tears and fury. The air itself grew heavy as Satoru walked out of the chapel into the open courtyard beyond, following Toji's figure. Despite the warmth of the day, a chill seemed to surround the young sorcerer. Outside, the campus was eerily quiet. The sky was a brilliant blue, the afternoon sun still shining, oblivious to the tragedy that had just unfolded. Satoru and Toji faced each other in a grassy clearing, a light breeze rustling the nearby trees. Toji Fushiguro was an imposing man, tall and lean, with cold, calculating eyes. He moved without a hint of cursed energy, a trait that made him nearly invisible to sorcerers' senses. In fact, Toji had no cursed energy at all due to a heavenly restriction, meaning traditional detection techniques could not track him. But Satoru didn't need an aura to sense the danger. The stain of Riko's blood on Toji's soul was enough. For the first time in his life, Gojo felt a true killing intent rising within himself. Still, he steadied his breathing. If he let anger control him, he could make a fatal mistake. And he knew too well now that Toji was an enemy unlike any he'd faced. Their battle began in a blur of motion. Toji lunged like a panther, closing the distance with astonishing speed. He wielded a myriad of tools, cursed knives and chains, and even a demonic wriggling cursed spirit stored in his arsenal that he hurled at Gojo. Satoru reacted instantly, the world sharpening into focus through his 6 eyes. He invoked infinity, the neutral state of the limitless, creating an invisible layer of space that slowed any oncoming attack to a crawl. Toji's knife, aimed straight for Satoru's heart, ground to a halt inches from its target, suspended as if trapped in thick molasses. Normally, that infinity kept Gojo untouchable, but Toji was cunning. With a flick of his wrist, he revealed a special dagger imbued with an ancient curse, the inverted spear of heaven, a tool capable of forcibly nullifying any technique it struck. In a split second, Toji slashed this dagger through the air, severing Satoru's infinity barrier. Before Gojo could blink, the man closed in and struck. A spray of blood painted the air. Satoru felt a searing pain rip through him. The world tilted, and his vision blurred. He staggered back, gasping, as he realized Toji's blade had run him through. It was a grievous wound, one that would be fatal to anyone else. Gojo Satoru, the invincible prodigy, had been caught off guard and impaled. Toji did not hesitate. He delivered another brutal slash for good measure, ensuring his opponent was down. Satoru collapsed onto the grass, his blindfold slipping off, and his eyes wide with shock. The rich blue of the 6 eyes dimmed as consciousness started to fade. Above him, the leaves of a tall tree swayed gently against the sky, and for a moment Satoru thought how strange it was that the day was still so beautiful, even as he lay dying. Toji Fushiguro looked down at the fallen sorcerer, confident that the job was done. Toji was a man who had killed many powerful sorcerers before, and by all accounts, he had just killed the strongest of them all. Without another glance, Toji turned and left the area, heading off to claim his reward, leaving Satoru Gojo in a growing pool of blood. But Satoru was not truly alone. In the silent courtyard as life poured out of him, the immense cursed energy within Gojo began to stir with ferocity. His mind drifted between darkness and light, flashing with memories, joyous days with his friends, laughter under the sun, Riko's smile and her trust in him, the promise he made to protect. Was this really where it would end? Deep in his fading heart, something refused to let go. In that liminal space between life and death, Satoru's consciousness sparked, grasping at the very technique he had never mastered. Reverse curse technique, the art of using cursed energy to heal and restore. He had always struggled with it in training, finding creation far harder than destruction. But now, on the brink of oblivion, a moment of clarity washed over him. Later he would describe it as a near-religious experience, a sense that in dying he finally understood what it meant to live. With a soft, almost inaudible breath, Gojo's soul ignited. A surge of reversed cursed energy flooded through his body, knitting torn flesh and sealing wounds from within. The blood around him began to evaporate as his injuries closed up miraculously. Satoru's fingers twitched, then gripped the grass. His chest rose as he drew in a deep, steady breath of air. A warm, golden glow seemed to emanate from him for just an instant. Against all odds, Gojo Satoru stood up once more. His head hung low, and when he opened his eyes, they shone with a new light, a calm, terrifying serenity. He had touched the edge of death and returned, more powerful than ever. Toji Fushiguro, some distance away, was taken aback when the young sorcerer he thought slain appeared again, stepping around a corner with quiet footsteps. Satoru's face was splattered with blood, his own blood, but his expression was unnervingly peaceful. A gentle smile even curved his lips, yet it did not reach the cold intensity of his glowing blue eyes. "You should have cut my head off," Gojo said to Toji, voice almost a whisper. In that moment, for perhaps the first time in his life, Toji felt a sliver of fear. The tables had turned. The hunter now stood before him, as if resurrected, exuding an overwhelming pressure. Their battle resumed, but this time Satoru was operating on a different level. Harnessing the full potential of Limitless, he conjured blue, a technique that creates a magnetic-like attraction by manifesting a negative space, effectively a little singularity of endless pull. With a mere flick of his finger, Gojo sent an invisible wave of crushing force that yanked Toji off his feet, smashing him through the air. The assassin fought back ferociously, trying every trick and tool he had, but Gojo's mastery was absolute now. With controlled breaths and a steady heart, Satoru combined techniques effortlessly. He used cursed technique reversal, red, an opposite force that repels, blasting Toji with a sudden explosive push that shattered the earth and air between them. The poor assassin, so formidable just minutes ago, was flung and battered, his senses reeling. Still, Toji rose, refusing to concede. But Satoru had one final move, a technique so rare and devastating that most sorcerers never dream of using it. Hollow purple. By merging the attracting force of blue with the repelling force of red, Gojo created a swirling orb of annihilation. A dark violet sphere crackling with power. He guided it forward with a gentle motion of his hand. The sphere traveled in a straight line, disintegrating everything it touched in a quiet, almost eerie fashion. Toji's eyes widened as purple bore down on him. In the last split second, perhaps he saw the specter of death and made peace. The orb engulfed him. When it passed, Toji Fushiguro lay on the ground, gravely wounded and defeated. The grassy clearing fell silent, save for the rustle of leaves and Gojo's soft footsteps approaching his fallen foe. Satoru looked down at Toji, no triumph in his eyes, only a somber acknowledgement. In a raspy voice, broken and bleeding, Toji gave a final, unexpected message. He spoke not of the fight, nor of victory or defeat, but of a little boy, his son, Megumi. Toji confessed that he had sold his own son to the Zenin sorcerer clan for money, and that in a few years they would come to claim the child. He uttered the child's name, Fushiguro Megumi, and with what might have been remorse flickering in his gaze, Toji asked Gojo a quiet favor. Do what you please with that information. Perhaps in his last moments, Toji hoped the sorcerers might look after the boy in a way he could not. With that off his chest, Toji Fushiguro closed his eyes and let out his final breath. As the life left Toji, Satoru stood there for a long moment, blood drying on his skin, the weight of everything settling onto him. The mission, Riko's death, his own brush with mortality, and now the revelation of a young life, Megumi, entangled in this cruel world. In the distance, the afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Satoru exhaled slowly. He had won. He had survived. But it hardly felt like a victory. There was an ache in his heart for Riko, a pain sharper than any dagger. When he finally walked back into the chapel, he found Suguru Geto kneeling in silent grief, cradling Riko's body. Shoko had arrived by then, tears in her eyes as she stood by to heal any wounds if she could. But some wounds were not of the flesh. Gojo approached his friends. Suguru looked up, hope flashing that maybe Satoru had some miracle left to revive Riko, but Satoru simply shook his head with a sorrowful gaze. There are limits, even to the strongest. Together, the three classmates mourned the loss of the star plasma vessel. The sunset's golden light filtered through the chapel's windows, illuminating the scene in a gentle glow as if the world itself paid respect. In that quiet moment, something changed within Satoru and Suguru both. The kind of change that only great pain can bring. They couldn't yet put it into words, but this day would linger in their hearts, guiding choices that would shape their futures in very different ways. The days following Riko's death were somber at Tokyo Jujutsu High. The autumn air had turned crisp, and leaves fell from the trees, skittering across the grounds in soft whispers. Satoru and Suguru completed their mission by reporting back to Master Tenjin's aides. The merger ritual had failed, and consequently, Master Tenjin would undergo an evolution of uncertain outcome. The elders accepted this with what seemed like cold indifference, concerned more with the repercussions than the loss of the young girl's life. This callous attitude planted a seed of bitterness in Suguru Geto's heart. He couldn't shake the image of Riko's smile and how cruelly it was taken, nor how the very people they protected, ordinary non-sorcerers, could never even understand the sacrifice Riko was willing to make for them. Suguru began to question, why do sorcerers have to suffer for a world that doesn't even know or appreciate them? Why should people like Riko, or even himself and Satoru, risk everything for monkeys, a term he started using bitterly for non-sorcerers who live blissfully ignorant of these dark battles? Satoru, for his part, processed his grief differently. Outwardly, he remained stoic, and even tried to maintain his usual carefree facade. He joked a bit too loudly, trained a bit too intensely, and pretended that everything was all right. But those close to him saw a subtle change. There were nights he would sit alone on the school's rooftop under the stars, blindfold off, his eyes lost in thought. The six eyes, which perceives all flows of energy, might have also shown him the currents of fate, swirling in unpredictable ways after that incident. He had nearly died, and in surviving unlocked new heights of power. Some would celebrate that. But Gojo took it as a solemn responsibility. I'm strong now, he thought, so I must ensure no one I care about dies on my watch again. It was a quiet vow, one that would drive him in the years to come. For Suguru Geto, each day after Riko's death felt heavier than the last. He continued going on missions, exercising curses as was his duty. But instead of feeling pride or relief when saving non-sorcerers from curses, he felt only emptiness and resentment. In one mission, Suguru encountered a village where two young sorcerer girls had been ostracized and abused by the very people they protected. Seeing this, something inside him snapped. In an event forever stained in darkness, Suguru made a horrific choice. He massacred the entire village of non-sorcerers, deeming that world better off without those monkeys who mistreated his kind. This was the turning point. Suguru's soul teetered over the brink, consumed by the belief that to end suffering, one must eliminate all non-sorcerers, leaving a pure world of only sorcerers behind. It was a twisted ideal, born from pain and despair. When news of Suguru Geto's actions reached Jujutsu High, it was like a thunderclap on a clear day. Satoru Gojo could not believe it at first. His best friend, committing an atrocity. Desperate to understand, Satoru sought Suguru out. He found him standing under the eaves of a temple one rainy evening, about to flee and forsake the Jujutsu world entirely. Rainwater dripped from the ends of Suguru's black hair. His usually gentle eyes were hard and distant. Satoru approached slowly, his heart pounding with a mix of anger, confusion, and sadness. "Why, Suguru?" Gojo asked softly, rain soaking through his clothes. There was no malice in his voice, only hurt. Suguru responded with a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. He spoke of a world where sorcerers wouldn't have to hide, where children like Riko wouldn't have to die for the ungrateful, where his loved ones would never suffer because of normal humans. His words were passionate but edged with madness. Suguru understood Suguru's pain. He felt it too, but this solution was unthinkable. The two friends, once inseparable, now stood on opposite sides of a moral chasm. In a final plea, Satoru told Suguru that if he continued down this path, he'd be considered a curse user, an enemy of their kind, and as the strongest, it would be Satoru's burden to stop him. The rain fell harder, the world around them a blur of grays. Suguru looked at Satoru, his expression strangely calm. In that moment, perhaps each saw the depth of the other's resolve. Suguru quietly admitted that he could no longer walk the same path as Gojo. He gently urged Satoru to kill him. Right then, if that was his duty, it was almost a dare, or maybe a final hope that his friend would set him free from his despair. Satoru raised a trembling hand, energy crackling around him. He could end it. He knew he should end it, by all logic. But Gojo Satoru's hand refused to strike the final blow. Through the curtain of rain he saw not a villain, but the boy who had laughed with him, trained with him, and shared dreams under the summer sky. Satoru's arm fell back to his side, the energy dissipating into the rain. He could not kill his best friend. Suguru gave a sad nod, almost grateful in a way, and turned his back to Gojo. "Take care of yourself, Satoru," he murmured, before vanishing into the night, leaving Satoru standing alone in the downpour. That was the last time Gojo would see Suguru Geto as a friend. The authorities declared Geto an infamous curse user soon after. He was branded a traitor, someone to be executed on sight. For the Jujutsu world, he became a dark legend, the sorcerer who slaughtered innocents. For Satoru, he became a lost friend, a constant ache in his heart, and a reminder of the system he so desperately wanted to change. After Suguru's defection, Satoru returned to Jujutsu High a changed man. He had lost so much in such a short span. Riko, then Suguru. On a quiet evening in the faculty room, Satoru sat with Masamichi Yaga, their teacher now soon to be principal, discussing what had happened. Gojo admitted something profound. With his near godlike power, he could easily kill all the hidebound corrupt higher-ups of the Jujutsu society, those whose rigid ways contributed to tragedies like these. But he realized that doing so would change nothing in the long run. "I'm tired of suffering under old fools," he confided to Yaga in a rare moment of vulnerability. "We need a new generation to reshape the world." From that night on, Satoru resolved to use his position and power not just to fight curses, but to reform the Jujutsu world itself. He would find, teach, and foster strong students with good hearts. He would nurture a generation that could one day overthrow the old ways simply by being better, by being what Suguru once dreamed they could be, without falling into hatred. The years rolled by gently after the painful events of Gojo's youth. Satoru graduated from Tokyo Jujutsu High and quickly rose to become a teacher there, despite still being quite young. In his early 20s, he was already a special grade sorcerer, officially recognized as the strongest in the field. His reputation spread far and wide. Curses spoke his name with dread and fellow sorcerers with awe. Despite this, Satoru often remained the same goofy, nonchalant man he'd grown into, hiding his piercing eyes behind a black blindfold or dark sunglasses, and wearing a relaxed smile as if he hadn't a care in the world. Beneath that carefree facade, though, was a keen strategic mind always thinking of the future of Jujutsu society. One of the first things Gojo did as a new teacher was to seek out the child Toji Fushiguro had mentioned with his dying breath. Satoru hadn't forgotten. Megumi Fushiguro, Toji's son, who would be sought by the Zenin clan. It didn't take long for Satoru to locate him. A little boy with the same spiky black hair and stubborn eyes as his father. Satoru approached young Megumi and his stepsister Tsutsumiki one afternoon on their way home from elementary school. It was a calm day. The sun was golden as it prepared to set. Gojo, dressed casually and smiling gently, must have seemed an odd sight to the children. Megumi, though only in grade school, was perceptive and already knew a bit about the cruel plans the Zenin family had for him. because of the cursed technique he had inherited, the 10 Shadows technique. When Satoru introduced himself and mentioned Toji, Megumi's face hardened in distrust. Gojo knelt down to meet Megumi at eye level. In a kind, straightforward way, he explained that Megumi had a choice. He did not have to go to the Zenin clan despite their claims on him. "I'll take care of everything," Satoru promised softly. He told Megumi that he could ensure both him and Sumiki would be safe and provided for. Megumi listened with a frown, wrestling with emotions too complex for a child: abandonment by his father, fear for his sister, and uncertainty about trusting this white-haired stranger. When Satoru mentioned the Zenin clan, Megumi interrupted, saying with remarkable firmness for his age that he didn't care about his father or the Zenins, because those adults had abandoned him and his sister. Rather than being offended, Satoru smiled at the boy's resolve. He gently patted Megumi's head, an affectionate gesture that made the child blink in surprise. "Everything will be fine," Satoru assured him in a warm, mellow tone. He only asked one thing of Megumi: "Become strong so you can keep up with me someday." It was both a challenge and a promise of guidance. In that moment, a spark of understanding passed between the little boy and the young sorcerer. Megumi agreed to Gojo's offer with a shy nod. From then on, Satoru quietly oversaw Megumi and Sumiki's upbringing, ensuring they had a normal life and eventually a place at Tokyo Jujutsu High when Megumi was ready. Gojo had saved Toji's child, not just out of obligation, but because he truly cared. It was one small way to honor the life that had been lost and prevent the cycle of pain from continuing. In the meantime, Gojo's life as a sorcerer was exceedingly busy. He took on countless missions, vanquishing curses that threatened people all over Japan. Tales of his feats became almost mythic. One story told in hushed tones by junior sorcerers was how Gojo single-handedly obliterated a rampaging curse in a remote village so quickly that not a single building was harmed. Another spoke of him subduing a cursed spirit the size of a mountain with just a wave of his hand. Whether exaggerated or not, such rumors all carried a kernel of truth. There seemed to be nothing Satoru Gojo could not do. With the limitless technique, he could neutralize any physical attack: bullets, blades, or explosions, all slowed to a stop before ever touching him. His mere presence on a battlefield meant victory for the side of Jujutsu, more often than not. And yet this immense strength did not make him complacent. Rather, it deepened his resolve to use it wisely. Between missions, Satoru also kept an eye out for promising youths. He visited jujutsu schools and even normal schools across the country, scouting for those with potential, the next generation who could be taught to be both strong and compassionate. It was during these years that he encountered a lonely boy cursed by love, Yuta Okutsu, whose immense cursed energy held a powerful spirit at bay. Yuta's situation would soon become one of Gojo's most important missions, intertwining with a reunion he never expected. In the year before our main story begins, a peculiar first-year student arrived at Tokyo Jujutsu High under Gojo's mentorship. Yuta Okutsu was a timid teenager haunted by a terrifying curse, the vengeful spirit of his childhood friend Rika, who clung to him after a tragic promise of love. Yuta's cursed energy was off the charts, nearly uncontrollable, and some in the jujutsu hierarchy thought he should be executed to prevent disaster. But Satoru Gojo saw something different in Yuta. He saw a kind soul in need of guidance, and a tremendous potential that could be honed for good. In Yuta, Gojo also saw a bit of his lost friend Suguru's wish, a powerful sorcerer from outside the old clans, someone who could shake up the status quo. And so, Satoru took Yuta under his wing, enrolling him at Jujutsu High rather than allowing the higher-ups to dispose of him. He introduced Yuta to his new classmates Maki, Togi, and Panda, each quirky and talented in their own right, and gently began training him. Gojo was patient and encouraging, teaching Yuta not to fear his power, but to embrace it, control it, and use it to protect others. As the cold winter of that year settled in, A dark plan unfolded in the shadows, one that would thrust Gojo and Yuta into a fierce confrontation with none other than Suguru Geto. Suguru had spent the years since his defection building a following of curse users and gathering cursed spirits. Consumed by his twisted ideal of a sorcerer-only world, he devised a bold scheme on December 24th, Christmas Eve. He would unleash a coordinated attack in two major cities, Shinjuku and Kyoto, releasing a horde of curses upon the populace in what became known as the Night Parade of 100 Demons. Amidst this chaos, Geto's true objective was to get his hands on Yuta Okatsu and the tremendous curse of Rika attached to him. If he could absorb Rika, his power would swell enough to possibly challenge even Gojo. The night of December 24th arrived with an ominous stillness in the air, as if the world sensed the impending mayhem. Gojo Satoru, fully aware of Geto's intentions, mobilized to protect Tokyo. Before the night parade began, Satoru and Suguru had a brief encounter, face to face for the first time in years. They stood atop a building, overlooking the city lights of Tokyo. A cold wind blew between them. Gojo regarded Geto quietly, his expression hidden behind his blindfold, but a deep sadness settled in his heart, seeing how far his friend had fallen. Geto greeted him not with malice, but almost with a sense of destiny, as if their conflict were inevitable. No words could bridge the gulf between them now. "I'll stop you here," Gojo said softly, resolutely. Geto only replied, "You can certainly try." And with that, their final clash began. As midnight approached, curses flooded the streets of Shinjuku and Tokyo, and simultaneously in Kyoto, wreaking havoc. Panic spread among ordinary people at the sight of monstrous spirits slithering and rampaging through city blocks. But Satoru Gojo was like a one-man army. In Shinjuku, he danced through the battlefield with unparalleled grace. Every movement he made was precise and efficient. A tilt of his head to dodge a curse's swipe, a casual flick of his wrist to shatter another curse into exorcised dust. When curses swarmed, he expanded his infinity around clusters of civilians to shield them, the creature's claws and fangs never reaching their targets. Those who were saved would later speak in hushed, awed tones of a white-haired man appearing amid the chaos, untouchable and calm, as buildings crumbled and curses roared around him. Within an hour, Gojo had cleared the Shinjuku area of the worst threats, leaving only low-level stragglers that other sorcerers could handle. However, in the meantime, Suguru Geto made his move at Jujutsu High in Tokyo, where Yuta and the other students had been kept safe. While Gojo was occupied with the night parade, Geto infiltrated the school grounds. A fierce confrontation erupted between Geto and the handful of students and teachers present. Though the others fought bravely, they were outmatched by Geto's arsenal of cursed spirits. Yuta, seeing his friends injured, finally embraced the full extent of his power. In a surge of emotion, he unleashed Rika, the cursed spirit of his beloved, to protect everyone. The night sky above the school crackled with energy as Rika's monstrous form fought Geto's curses. The ground trembled. In those tense moments, Yuta resolved that if he had to, he would give his life to break Rika's curse and stop Geto. Satoru, having dispatched the threats in the city, sensed the massive spike of energy back at Jujutsu High. With limitless technique, long-distance teleportation was within his capability. Without wasting a second, he teleported directly to the school in the blink of an eye. What he found was the aftermath of an intense battle. The school courtyard in ruins, Yuta exhausted and injured, and Suguru Geto slumped against a wall, critically wounded by the overwhelming power of Rika and Yuta's last stand. The other students, hurt but alive, watched wide-eyed as Gojo appeared like a savior descending. Yuta had succeeded in defeating Geto, but at great cost. He was preparing to release Rika and likely sacrifice himself in the process. However, with Geto neutralized, Gojo intervened calmly. In a gentle voice, He thanked Rika for protecting Yuta and the others, and convinced Yuta to unwind his fury. The immediate threat was over. Rika's spirit, as if understanding, began to fade, and with a heartfelt goodbye, the curse was broken. The little girl's soul finding peace at last. Yuta collapsed, alive but completely drained. Satoru caught him, cradling the boy much as he had once cradled Riko. Only this time, the story had a bittersweet triumph. Yuta was saved, his curse lifted, and their foe defeated. Gojo then approached Suguru Geto, who lay bloodied and defeated. The night was quiet now. The only sound the distant sirens in the city and the crackling of a few small fires on campus. Suguru looked up at Satoru, and for a moment, it was just Satoru and Suguru again, two old friends on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide. Mortally wounded, Geto managed a weak smile. He spoke softly, perhaps reminiscing, or perhaps relieved that Satoru's students, his targets, were safe after all. In this final meeting, Satoru knelt by his friend's side. Some say Geto asked Satoru, with tears in his eyes, if he had any last words for him as a friend. And Satoru, in a tender moment of mercy, squeezed Suguru's hand and said, "We are who we are, Suguru. I won't curse you. In the end, you were my best friend." What passed exactly between them is known only to the two of them, but in the stillness of that winter night, Satoru Gojo did what had to be done. With a heavy heart, he ended Suguru Geto's life, sparing his friend any further suffering. It was a merciful, swift act, one that caused Satoru immense pain even as he knew it was necessary. Gojo emerged from that battle, carrying not just Yuta in his arms, but also the weight of yet another loss. The night parade was over. The curses were dealt with, and the civilians safe. In the aftermath, Yuta Okatsu recovered under Shoko's care, and with Gojo's support, he grew stronger from the ordeal. In fact, as part of Yuta's journey to gain control over his immense power, Satoru eventually arranged for Yuta to go overseas to Africa with Miguel, a former enemy turned ally, for training and growth. But on that night, after all was said and done, Gojo walked slowly home beneath the stars, alone with his thoughts. The world was quiet again, snow beginning to drift down in soft flakes. He had finally laid Suguru's tormented soul to rest. In his heart he felt both deep sorrow and a measure of peace. Peace in knowing his friend would no longer suffer, and in seeing Yuta's bright future secured. Satoru looked up at the sky where the clouds parted to reveal a gentle moon, and whispered a goodbye to Suguru Geto under his breath. The cold air carried his words away, and Gojo allowed himself a rare moment of tears that glistened in the moonlight before they too were wiped away, leaving only resolve. Spring came after that long winter, bringing renewal and new faces to Tokyo Jujutsu High. The campus, repaired from the night parade damage, once again filled with the laughter and chatter of students. In the year 2018, 3 first-year students in particular would come under Gojo's tutelage and find themselves drawn into his orbit. Megumi Fushiguro, the very boy Gojo had promised to watch over years ago, now a quiet, determined teenager with the power to summon Shikigami. Nobara Kugisaki, a fiery and bold girl from the countryside with a talent for voodoo doll-style curse techniques. And last but not least, Yuji Itadori, an athletic, warm-hearted boy who was about to stumble into the jujutsu world in the most unexpected way. It began on a day like any other. Yuji Itadori was a completely ordinary high schooler at the time. Ordinary, except for his astonishing physical strength and his heart of gold that compelled him to help others. By a twist of fate, Yuji came into possession of a strange relic, a shriveled, mummified finger that his school's occult club believed to be a talisman. Unbeknownst to them, it was one of the cursed fingers of Ryomen's Sukuna, an ancient and supremely evil curse, fragmented into 20 pieces, Holding even one of these fingers is akin to holding a ticking time bomb of cursed energy. That night, drawn by the finger's malevolence, other curses attacked Yuji's school, threatening his friends. In a moment of desperation to gain the power to save the people he cared about, Yuji made a reckless choice. He swallowed the cursed finger to harness its energy. In doing so, he became the human vessel of Sukuna, resurrecting a sliver of the king of curses within himself. This singular act set off alarms in the Jujutsu world. Megumi Fushiguro, who was already a student of Jujutsu High and had been tracking the finger, witnessed Yuji's transformation. A fierce battle ensued in the dark school halls as Sukuna briefly took over Yuji's body, reveling in his new freedom and power. Yet, miraculously, Yuji fought back control within mere minutes, a feat that should have been impossible. By the time Satoru Gojo arrived on the scene, responding to Megumi's call for backup, he found an extraordinary sight: Yuji Itadori, a normal boy, containing the essence of the worst curse known to history, and somehow still himself. Gojo's interest was piqued like never before. On the moonlit school grounds, Gojo stood before Yuji, who was still confused and reeling from the ordeal. With a playful grin and relaxed posture, Satoru introduced himself to this bewildered teenager. He explained, kindly but matter-of-factly, that Yuji now housed Sukuna, and by the laws of Jujutsu society, he should be executed as a danger to humanity. Yuji's face fell, but before fear could take root, Gojo gently held up a hand and proposed an alternative. In a tone one might use to discuss weekend plans, Satoru suggested, "How about this? You will join my school, learn about your new powers, and help us retrieve all of Sukuna's fingers. Only after you've consumed them all, thus collecting and neutralizing the curse, will the sentence be carried out." In truth, this was Gojo's clever way of postponing Yuji's execution indefinitely, using the higher-up's own interests to eliminate Sukuna completely as leverage. Yuji, who had a strong sense of justice, agreed to these terms not to save himself, but because he felt responsible to finish what he started and ensure Sukuna could be destroyed so nobody else would get hurt. In that moment, Gojo placed a reassuring hand on Yuji's shoulder. Under the gentle silver light of the moon, a silent promise passed between teacher and new student. "We'll figure this out together." The next day, Yuji Itadori officially joined Tokyo Jujutsu High as a first-year student under Satoru Gojo's watch. When he arrived on campus, he was greeted by Megumi and Nobara. Megumi, who had already known Yuji from the incident, gave a reserved nod, relief evident in his eyes that Yuji was okay. Nobara, skeptical at first of this pink-haired, cheerful boy, quickly warmed up after a bit of friendly banter. The trio instantly had a sibling-like dynamic: Yuji the optimistic big brother, Megumi the cool, introspective middle child, and Nobara the bold, outspoken sister. Gojo observed them with a fond grin. These were his students now, and he felt a swell of pride and protectiveness. As a teacher, Gojo's methods were unorthodox, to say the least. He wasn't one to drone on in lectures or impose strict rules. Instead, he believed in hands-on experience and personal growth. Early on, he took Yuji under his wing for special training, particularly to help Yuji learn to control his cursed energy and, by extension, keep Sukuna's influence at bay. In one memorable training session, Gojo handed Yuji an old movie collection: cheesy comedies, tearjerkers, action flicks, along with a peculiar item, a small cursed corpse, essentially a kind of magical puppet in the form of a cute plush doll. "Your training," Gojo declared with a chuckle, "is to watch these movies, and don't let your energy drop, or that doll will punch you." Yuji's face was a mix of disbelief and amusement. It seemed too easy, just watching movies, but soon he understood the genius behind it. The emotions stirred by the films would cause his control to slip, and the doll would spring to life to whack him if Sukuna's cursed energy spiked even a little. It was a humorous yet effective way to teach Yuji the fine control needed to keep a restless curse like Sukuna in check. Each evening, as the sun set in warm hues, one could peek through a classroom window to see Yuji laughing or gasping at a movie scene, then yelping as a tiny doll fist flew at his face whenever he lost focus. And outside on the corridor, Gojo would often lounge against a wall, humming softly, fully aware of the goings-on and ready to intervene if things got out of hand, but mostly just enjoying the antics and the progress his student made. Gojo also trained Megumi and Nobara, though they required different approaches. Megumi, being from the Zenin lineage, though he rejected the clan, had inherited the sophisticated Ten Shadows technique and already had solid fundamentals from middle school. For him, Gojo offered less direct training and more guidance, dropping in occasionally during Megumi's solo practice to give tips or friendly challenges. In one instance, Satoru surprised Megumi by appearing mid-training and playfully provoking one of Megumi's summoned Shikigami, a white divine dog, into chasing him, forcing Megumi to adapt and command the creature more assertively. Nobara, fiery and confident, didn't hesitate to voice her opinions, even telling Gojo off if she thought his assignments were absurd. Satoru found her refreshing. He'd nod sagely as she complained, and then offer some cryptic advice that would later make sense when she was out on a mission. Through it all, Gojo fostered teamwork. He sent the first years on small missions together, believing shared experiences would strengthen their bond. And indeed, with each challenge, be it a low-grade curse haunting a roadside or a test in an abandoned building, Yuji, Megumi, and Nobara grew closer and more in sync, trusting one another with their lives. They began to call each other friends, even family, and the trust in their eyes whenever they looked at Gojo said it all. He was their mentor and their guardian, and they felt safe under his wing. Life regained a pleasant rhythm for a while. Days at Jujutsu High were filled with study, training, and missions, and nights with camaraderie in the dorms. Gojo, when not off on his own duties, could often be found napping in the afternoon sun by the school steps, or sneaking sweets, like his beloved Konpeito candies, and sharing them with Yuji, who eagerly accepted. But this peaceful lull would not last forever. Unseen to most, an undercurrent of menace was growing. A group of special-grade cursed spirits, intelligent and capable of speech, had begun to band together with a common goal: the elimination of Satoru Gojo, whom they saw as the greatest threat to their existence. If Gojo could be removed, the balance would tip and curses could run rampant. This group was led by the eerie, patchwork-faced curse Mahito, along with the volcanic Jogo, the plant-like Hanami, and a few others. In the shadows they also had a human ally orchestrating plans, none other than a mysterious figure who looked identical to Suguru Geto, though Suguru was supposed to be dead. For now that mastermind remained in the background, and the cursed spirits prepared the first move in their wicked game. That first move came on a quiet summer day. Yuji was at that time believed dead by most of the school, due to a complicated incident where Sukuna had torn out Yuji's heart, and Yuji had a temporary brush with death, causing the higher-ups to think he'd perished, all part of a plan by Gojo and others to hide Yuji and train him in secret. While Yuji trained, Gojo continued teaching Megumi and Nobara, and preparing for an upcoming goodwill event with Kyoto Jujutsu High. It was during this lull that Jogo, the volcano-headed curse with molten hatred for humans, decided to confront Satoru Gojo directly. Perhaps Jogo was overconfident, or perhaps he underestimated just how wide the gap was between even a powerful curse and the strongest sorcerer alive. Jogo launched his ambush when Gojo was traveling by road one afternoon. The scene was deceptively serene. A countryside road lined with trees, cicadas droning in the summer heat. Gojo had just stepped out of his car, where an assistant, Ijichi, waited nervously. Without warning, the atmosphere distorted as intense heat rolled in. Jogo emerged, a grotesque humanoid with a flaming crown like an active volcano. He wasted no time, spitting a massive wave of fire to incinerate Gojo where he stood. The flames roared and engulfed the spot. But when the smoke cleared, Satoru was standing exactly where he had been, utterly unharmed, idly dusting his shoulders. Jogo's fiery attack hadn't even singed a single thread of Gojo's clothes. With a tilt of his head, Gojo greeted the curse almost politely. "Oh, you must be one of those special grades, here to kill me, HM." His tone was light, but there was a glint of excitement in it. It was rare for him to be personally targeted, and truth be told, Gojo relished the chance to stretch his muscles a bit. Jogo snarled and charged, hurling flaming punches and bursts of lava, each strike that should have smashed or burned. Gojo simply stopped, inches away from his body, as if an invisible barrier encased him. "Infinity," Gojo explained casually to no one in particular, as Jogo's clawed hand froze in midair before touching Gojo's face. The curse's eyes widened in confusion and frustration. Gojo's limitless was at work. Space itself expanded between Jogo's attacks, and Gojo creating an infinite series of halved distances, such that the attacks could never reach him. To Jogo it felt like trying to push two like poles of magnets together. No matter how hard he tried, he could not bridge the last gap. For Satoru, this was effortless. To Jogo, it was infuriating. What made it worse for the curse was Gojo's demeanor. The white-haired sorcerer didn't even seem serious. In fact, he vanished for a moment mid-fight, only to reappear a short distance away, not to retreat, but to fetch Yuji Itadori, whom he had secreted nearby. Gojo decided this battle was a perfect teaching opportunity for Yuji, who had by then recovered and was training in private with Gojo. In an instant, Satoru teleported Yuji to the battlefield and plopped him down as an observer. Yuji, surprised but thrilled to be with his mentor again, looked around wide-eyed at the sight, a living volcano cursing and spewing fire at Gojo, who waved cheerily. "Pay attention, Yuji," Gojo said with a playful lilt. "This is a special grade curse. You'll probably never see one this close without, well, dying. So let's make the most of it." Jogo felt utterly insulted. Gojo was so unconcerned by him that he was giving a lecture in the middle of their fight. Enraged, Jogo tried to incinerate Yuji on the spot for that impertinence, launching a molten blast toward the human boy. But Satoru moved with blinding speed, blocking the attack effortlessly, and chided the curse like one would a misbehaving pet. Eyes on me, big guy." In that moment, Gojo decided to end the charade. He vanished from Jogo's sight, only to appear right behind the curse, one hand nonchalantly in his pocket, and the other resting on Jogo's shoulder. It was as if Gojo had teleported, but really, he was just that fast. Before Jogo could react, Satoru drove his knee upward in a powerful strike, hitting Jogo square in the torso, and sending the curse hurtling through the forest with explosive force. Trees shattered in the curse's path, and ground cratering where he landed. Though dazed, Jogo was not defeated yet. Furious and cornered, he decided to unleash his ultimate move, domain expansion. The air grew thick with cursed energy as Jogo's domain formed, reshaping reality around them into a nightmarish volcanic landscape. Within this domain, the very environment was Jogo's weapon: superheated air, bubbling lava, an oppressive heat that could char flesh in an instant. Yuji, standing outside, watched anxiously as a shimmering barrier formed around Gojo and Jogo, locking them in. Even from outside, the waves of heat were palpable. Ijichi, the assistant, trembled behind cover, fearing the worst. But inside the domain, Gojo remained composed. In fact, as the lethal landscape closed in, Satoru calmly explained to Yuji through the barrier, as if giving a class the concept of domain expansions and how to counter them. When caught in an enemy's domain, he lectured lightly. The sure hit effect makes their attacks unavoidable, unless you have an even more refined domain to push theirs back. Jogo launched at Gojo, certain that within his own domain, the sorcerer would finally be vulnerable. But then Gojo simply said, like this for example. In a split second, Satoru Gojo removed his blindfold, revealing his 6 eyes in full for the first time in the fight. They glowed an otherworldly blue, serene yet powerful. With a tranquil expression, Gojo invoked his domain expansion, unlimited void. All at once, infinity itself unfolded within Jogo's volcanic domain. The two domains clashed, but Gojo's was vastly superior. It overrode Jogo's flames and magma, with an expanse of cosmic darkness filled with drifting stars and spiraling galaxies of light. Yuji could only gape at the spectacle. Even from outside he felt an overwhelming pressure, though it wasn't directed at him. Inside the unlimited void, Jogo was completely at Gojo's mercy. The sure hit effect of unlimited void flooded Jogo's mind with endless information, a boundless torrent of sensory input that left the curse paralyzed. To Jogo, it was as if time had stopped, and he was drowning in the universe itself, unable to move or think. Gojo floated right in front of the immobilized curse, looking almost sorry for him. "This is the difference between us," he said softly. After a few seconds, which felt like an eternity to Jogo, Gojo released the domain. The forest was back. Jogo collapsed to his knees, utterly defeated and mentally broken, drooling and incoherent from the effect of the unlimited void. Satoru exhaled and casually tied his blindfold back over his eyes, as if nothing spectacular had happened. He then walked over to Yuji, giving him a thumbs up and a smile. "That's how it's done." Yuji was awestruck, excitement brimming in him. He had just witnessed the full power of his teacher, and it was beyond anything he imagined. It was inspiring and reassuring. With Gojo around, Yuji felt like no evil in the world was unbeatable. Gojo wasn't quite finished, though. He gently dragged the limp Jogo over to a tree and propped the curse up. He had questions. These intelligent curses were unusual, and their motives unclear. But before Gojo could get much information, their interrogation was interrupted by the sudden appearance of another curse, Hanami, who used plant vines to snatch Jogo away. Hanami, who had camouflaged nearby, wisely chose to retreat rather than fight Gojo then. Satoru allowed it, not particularly concerned. He'd gotten a demonstration for Yuji out of the fight, and now he had confirmation that a group was targeting him. He patted Yuji on the shoulder, praising him for observing well and declaring test of courage over. Yuji laughed, adrenaline still pumping. Together teacher and student headed back, leaving behind scorched earth and a powerful reminder to any watching enemies. Gojo Satoru stands invincible. News of Gojo's triumph over Jogo spread in the underworld of curses and among sorcerers alike. The higher-ups, who often chafed at Gojo's attitude, could not deny that without him, humanity's defense against the worst evils would be thin indeed. For Gojo's students, the incident became a tale they told with pride, their teacher, blindfold fluttering in the breeze, taking down a walking volcano and hardly breaking a sweat. Yet, for all his might, Gojo remained humble in his own odd way. He joked with his students that they better train hard because someday they would have to handle such threats, while he relaxed in Hawaii. Typical Gojo humor. Behind the jokes, though, he earnestly believed in their potential. He often thought of them as the bright lights that could dispel the darkness that had claimed his best friend. After the Jogo incident, life continued with relative normalcy for a while at Jujutsu High. Yuji Itadori was formally reintroduced to his classmates, to their shock and joy, since they had thought him dead. There was laughter, some tears of relief. Nobara gave Yuji a good punch for making them worry, then hugged him tightly, and the trio was whole again. Gojo watched their reunion from a distance, leaning against a doorway with a satisfied grin. Moments like this, simple, heartfelt moments, were victories to him too. They meant that despite all the chaos, he had managed to protect something precious, the smiles and friendships of the young. Soon came the time for the annual Tokyo-Kyoto Goodwill event, a friendly competition between the two sister schools of Jujutsu sorcery. It was meant to foster camaraderie and showcase the students' growth. This year, however, the event was laden with underlying tension. Certain conservative figures from the Kyoto school and the Jujutsu Council saw Yuji Itadori as nothing more than Sukuna's vessel and secretly planned to use the event as cover to eliminate him. Gojo was fully aware of these underhanded intentions. In response, he made a move that was both brilliant and humorous. He didn't inform his Tokyo students that Yuji was alive until the day of the event, when Yuji dramatically made his entrance to the shocked gasps and then exuberant cheers of Megumi and Nobara. Gojo figured the surprise would not only lift his students' morale but also throw the Kyoto leadership off balance, seeing their target hale and hearty. The exchange event began as a competitive battle game in a wooded training ground. Tokyo's team, led by Panda and Maki, 2 second years, along with Togi, Megumi, Nobara, and Yuji, coordinated well, thanks in part to Gojo's emphasis on teamwork. Kyoto's team had their own strengths and were initially aggressive, especially once some of them were ordered in secret to assassinate Yuji during the chaos. But Yuji's natural charm and earnestness actually ended up winning over some of his would-be attackers mid-fight. They saw he was a good person, not a ticking time bomb. The competition was fierce, but mostly in good sport, until the real enemy made their move. Unbeknownst to the students, the Cursed Spirit Coalition saw the Goodwill event as a ripe opportunity to strike at the sorcerers. Midway through the event, as students dueled in the forest, a sinister veil suddenly fell over the entire area. This wasn't a normal tournament barrier. It was one erected by the enemy, and it had a very specific condition. Satoru Gojo could not enter. The enemy knew that if Gojo joined the fray, their plans would fail, so they created a veil that recognized his presence and kept him out, like a supernatural lock with Gojo as the key that must remain outside. Satoru, who had been observing from the sidelines with other teachers, clicked his tongue in irritation when he sensed the nature of the barrier. They're targeting my students because they can't target me, he realized, eyes narrowing behind his blindfold. Inside the veil, confusion erupted among the participants as a flood of low-grade curses, sent by Mahito's gang, attacked both Tokyo and Kyoto students indiscriminately. It quickly became apparent this was no longer a friendly match, but a real battle for survival. The students grouped up, setting aside school rivalry to face the threat together. Meanwhile, one of the special-grade curses, Hanami, the forest spirit, silently entered the scene. Hanami was a looming figure with branches and flowers adorning a body of gnarled wood and muscle. Despite an intimidating presence, Hanami moved with a strangely gentle demeanor, almost sad, as if lamenting the violence even while causing it. Outside the barrier, Gojo's frustration mounted. He could hear distant booms and see treetops shattering inside the dome of the veil, but he was locked out. His every attempt to force entry was met with resistance. The curtain was programmed specifically against him, a testament to how much the enemy feared his intervention. However, Satoru Gojo was not one to simply accept defeat by a trick. Planting his feet firmly, he concentrated his energy. If a subtle approach failed, he'd brute force it. His aura flared, and with a swift motion, he thrust his hand forward, pouring red energy, a repulsive burst, into the barrier. The ground beneath him cracked from the pressure of the emitted force. Inside, as students battled curses, a section of the veil shimmered violently, on the verge of shattering but held. It would take time and more power to break through. Gojo grit his teeth, concern for his students gnawing at him. "Hold on. I'm coming," he murmured under his breath, channeling more power. Inside the veil, Hanami engaged several of the students at once. Panda and Toge fought valiantly to stall the powerful curse, while Megumi and Nobara coordinated surprise attacks. Yuji and Awei Todo, a brawny Kyoto student, who oddly enough had befriended Yuji mid-fight over a shared interest in a celebrity tag teamed against Hanami, exchanging fierce blows. Despite being an enemy, Hanami didn't radiate hatred. Rather, they spoke in soft tones about the pain of the natural world and seemed to want to protect curses, which piqued Yuji's empathy, even in battle. Still, a fight it was, and Hanami's strength was overwhelming. Even as blows landed that would cripple ordinary curses, Hanami endured, a secret second pair of arms emerging, and a strange bud-like eye on their shoulders starting to open, indicating the curse was getting serious. Just when it seemed the tide might turn against the students, a ripple ran through the barrier. Everyone, friend and foe, felt the surge of a familiar colossal energy. With an echoing boom, a massive hole burst open in the veil. In strode Gojo Satoru, finally breaking through. His hair fluttered with residual energy, and though his face was mostly covered, one could imagine the fierce protective glare in his eyes. Relief washed over the students. Their teacher was here. A chorus of excited voices rang out. Gojo-sensei. Hanami, recognizing the threat, attempted to retreat, but Gojo wouldn't allow any further harm or escape. He raised one hand, and for the second time in so many months, decided to unleash hollow purple. However, this time it was different from the calculated point-blank shot he used on Toji years ago. Here, Gojo used purple in a dazzling long-range manner to both take out the fleeing curse and send a message to all enemies. Concentrating the repulsive and attractive forces into a single orb, Satoru released a throbbing sphere of purple energy that hurtled across the battlefield with a low hum. It tore through the air, obliterating a swath of forest in its path. Trees, curses, everything disintegrated silently into nothingness in that line. Hanami, attempting to outrun it, lost an arm to the void and was grievously wounded, but managed to dive into the earth and vanish before total annihilation. Gojo didn't pursue. The aim was never to kill at all costs, but to protect. With Hanami gone, and the curses either exorcised or scattered, the danger passed. The veil collapsed entirely, now that its purpose was foiled, sunlight streaming back onto the battle-worn training field. Gojo immediately checked on his students, his voice gentle and reassuring as he ensured none were critically hurt. To his pride, they had all survived with only moderate injuries, and had even kept each other safe in the process. If anything, the ordeal had forged stronger bonds among the Tokyo and Kyoto students, and certainly had showcased to the Kyoto side why Gojo believed so strongly in his wards. After emergency aid was administered by Shoko and others, the shaken but safe students sat together on the lawn, some still in disbelief at what had transpired. Nobara joked weakly that this was one heck of a way to win the tournament by default. Yuji laughed, the sound easing the remaining tension, while Megumi gave a small, exhausted smile. Satoru stood nearby, speaking quietly with Principal Yaga and the Kyoto principal, making it very clear that such machinations against Yuji, or any of his students, would not be tolerated again. There was a steel in Gojo's voice that left both older men nodding earnestly. Gojo rarely pulled rank, but when he did, even the stodgiest elder had to yield. Later, as evening fell and the students retired to rest, Gojo strolled through the now quiet woods, surveying the damage from the battle. Fireflies had begun to flicker in the undergrowth, and despite the broken trees and craters, a sense of peace returned to the area. He felt the night breeze and allowed himself a moment to decompress. This day had been a close call, but they had prevailed. He mused on how proud he was of the kids. They fought together, grew together. They're getting strong, he thought, heart swelling with a teacher's pride. Yet, even as he allowed himself to relax, Satoru knew the enemy was not done. Mahito and the mysterious figure masquerading as Gato were still out there, planning something far more sinister, something to do with a certain night in Shibuya. But for now, on this calm night after the storm, Gojo put those worries aside. The moon rose, and he quietly hummed an old lullaby to himself as he walked back to campus, every bit the guardian of the new era, determined and hopeful. The months after the Goodwill event were relatively quiet. Autumn painted the Jujutsu High campus in hues of red and gold. The students continued their missions and studies, each growing in skill and confidence. Gojo split his time between teaching and high-level sorcerer duties, including investigating the movements of the Curse Alliance. Through intel and a bit of Gojo's own intuition, the Jujutsu Society learned that something was being planned for October 31st in Shibuya. The clues were unsettling: a half-foretold calamity, whispers of a prison that could seal even Satoru Gojo, and increased curse activity around Shibuya, one of Tokyo's bustling city districts. On the day of Halloween, as revelers in costumes crowded the Shibuya streets, a darkness crept beneath. Precisely at 7 p.m., multiple veil barriers dropped over Shibuya, partitioning areas and taking thousands of civilians hostage in an instant. The largest veil encompassed the Shibuya underground train stations, where throngs of people found themselves trapped. Panic rose as monsters and curse users surfaced, instructing the frightened civilians to do one thing: call for Satoru Gojo. It was a trap whose bait was the helpless public. They knew Gojo would come to protect them, and they were right. The sorcerers mobilized swiftly. Gojo, along with some colleagues like Nanami, Yuji, Megumi, and others, converged on Shibuya. Assessing the situation, Gojo realized that the enemy's primary aim was indeed to lure him. Thus he made a crucial decision. He would enter alone initially. His presence alone had the best chance of keeping the civilians safe, and if any scenario could endanger his allies, he'd rather face it by himself. He instructed the others to stand by and handle any overflow or assist in evacuation once things were in motion. Megumi, Yuji, and the others protested, wanting to fight alongside their mentor, but Gojo gave them one of his rare serious smiles. "Trust me on this," he said calmly. "You all have your roles, and I have mine. I'll be fine." There was such unwavering confidence in his voice that it quelled further arguments. Still, as Gojo stepped towards the curtain's edge, he paused and without turning said lightly, "After this, I'm treating you all to a nice dinner, so stay safe." It was a small assurance and a promise of normalcy after chaos, which gave the students something to hold on to. Gojo passed through the barrier into the underground station's chaos. The scene was tense. Crowds of civilians pressed together on the platform, many dressed in Halloween outfits, all wearing expressions of fear. The flickering fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows. As Satoru appeared, a hush fell. Many civilians didn't know who he was, yet his presence was oddly reassuring, as if an authority beyond the police had arrived. For those with any jujutsu awareness, a breath of relief escaped. The strongest sorcerer was here. He walked among the crowd, gently telling them to stay calm, emanating an aura that subconsciously eased their panic. With 6 eyes, Gojo surveyed the entire underground structure in his mind. He sensed multiple special-grade curses lurking. Choso, a half-curse, half-human, with blood manipulation. And perhaps others, and worryingly, he noticed strange transfigured humans, twisted monstrosities that had once been people but were reshaped by cursed techniques. Mahito's work, no doubt. These poor souls were scattered among the hostages, ready to sow chaos. Gojo took a deep breath, centering himself. He had to eliminate these threats and protect the innocents, all while likely being the sole target of at least 3 powerful enemies. This would be one of the greatest tests of his abilities. Suddenly, from the far end of the platform, Jogo and Choso revealed themselves, flanking Hanami, who despite their last battle, had returned, albeit missing an arm. They attacked in unison, aiming to overwhelm Gojo. At the same time, Mahito from above began dropping swarms of transfigured humans directly onto the platform, turning once normal people into mindless attacking creatures to both harm civilians and distract Gojo. It was a carefully coordinated ambush. But Satoru Gojo had not earned his title, the strongest, lightly. In the face of this onslaught, he remained astonishingly composed. In fact, as the curses lunged, he closed his eyes briefly and steadied his breathing, then moved. What followed was a display of precision and power that defied belief, executed with a detached, almost meditative calm. First, Gojo used blue to create a vacuum in one area of the platform, swiftly pulling all the transfigured humans away from the dense cluster of real humans, thereby minimizing potential casualties. Those warped creatures flew through the air with startled shrieks, clumping together towards the created singularity point. In the next instant, Gojo propelled himself right into their midst, a blur of black uniform and silver hair, with graceful surgical strikes, a palm thrust here imbued with crushing cursed energy, a spinning kick there. He neutralized dozens of these creatures in mere seconds, each blow delivered with merciful swiftness. The civilians watched, many with tears in their eyes, both in terror of the monsters and awe at Gojo's protection. To them he seemed less human and more a force of nature, untouchable and omnipresent. Jogo and Hanami attempted to capitalize on Gojo, being surrounded by what they hoped were distractions. Jogo spewed forth a massive wave of flames, while Hanami shot razor-sharp wooden stakes, both attacks converging on Gojo and, unfortunately, some still-standing civilians in the crossfire. With impeccable timing, Gojo raised his hand and expanded his infinity. The attacks slowed and halted before reaching any living being. The curses pressed harder, pouring more energy in, but Gojo's barrier held, shimmering as sparks and embers and wooden shards floated harmlessly in mid-air. However, maintaining infinity for too long with so many people around was a challenge. It risked isolating the civilians from being evacuated. Gojo knew he needed to change tactics swiftly. Choosing a bold strategy, Gojo actually dropped infinity for a fraction of a moment, by choice. In that sliver of time, he moved with blistering speed directly in front of Hanami, who was caught off guard as the sorcerer suddenly closed the gap. With a quiet apology, almost in a whisper, Gojo thrust his hand forward and unleashed red and amplified repulsion directly into Hanami at point blank. The red blast hit the plant curse like a freight train, a concentrated burst of divergent energy that sent Hanami's heavy body rocketing across the station and slamming into a distant wall with a resounding crash. The ancient curse, already wounded from before, collapsed and ceased moving, the once fierce forest spirit now silent, their bodies starting to wither like a broken branch. Jogo roared in fury, unleashing flaming projectiles in rapid succession at the sorcerer who had just downed his comrade. Tiles shattered, and the very air wavered with heat. Gojo nimbly dodged or deflected these, ensuring none veered toward the civilians huddled on the ground. Choso, cold and methodical, saw an opening and manipulated his blood techniques to send piercing darts of hardened blood and slicing whips toward Gojo from another angle, trying to corner him. Now Gojo was juggling multiple vectors of threat. It was time for an all-or-nothing move, one that, while risky, could save the people and finish this skirmish quickly. High above the platform, hidden in the shadows, Geto, or rather the imposter in Suguru Geto's body, watched intently. In his hand he gripped a cube-like artifact with menacing aura, the prison realm. This was the trap they intended for Gojo, a special-grade cursed object capable of sealing even someone like him, but it needed to be activated at the perfect moment, when Gojo was within close range and stationary for a few seconds. It was nearly time. Back on the platform, Gojo noticed more transfigured humans being dumped in by Mahito to escalate the chaos. There were still too many civilians present, making it hard for him to fully unleash his power. He made a quick decision that only someone with his abilities could: domain expansion, unlimited void, for zero point 0.2 seconds. It was a gambit to knock out all non-sorcerers instantly without lasting harm and eliminate the fodder curses, giving him free reign over the battlefield. In an instant, the station was bathed in the ethereal light of his domain. For that briefest fragment of time, everyone within the area saw infinity, minds flooded with a tidal wave of information. Then, as swiftly as it came, the domain vanished. The result was dramatic. Every civilian and lesser creature in the area fell unconscious, gently slumping to the ground. They weren't dead, merely in a state of mental overload that would wear off. But now they would no longer feel fear or get in harm's way. It was the kindest way Gojo could think of to neutralize the hostages as factors without hurting them. Jogo and Choso reeled momentarily as well, the domain affecting even them just a bit. Hanami, already down, was likely finished off by being exposed to the void's effect at close range. Now, at last the underground station was quiet of human cries. Only Satoru and his enemies remained active amid the sea of still bodies. Gojo's plan was working, but it came at a cost. Activating even a fraction of his domain had momentarily left him stationary, a necessary pause to enact the technique. And that's when Geto made his move. Appearing at the platform's edge not far from Gojo, the figure of Suguru Geto stepped forward calmly, holding out the prison realm. Gojo's eyes widened behind his blindfold at the sight of Suguru, his best friend, who he knew was dead by his own hand. A surge of emotion hit him, shock and an aching nostalgia, freezing him for a crucial heartbeat. "Suguru," he whispered, barely audible. Those few seconds were all the prison realm needed. The cursed artifact activated, unraveling from a cube into a grotesque portal with a massive blinking eye. It locked onto Gojo. Tendrils of binding cursed energy shot out and coiled around Satoru before he could fully react. In that moment, Satoru Gojo, who had been fighting dozens of enemies effortlessly, found himself captured by something beyond sheer strength. It was premeditated trickery, exploiting his one moment of emotional vulnerability. The world around Gojo slowed. He glanced at the image of Goto and sensed something was off. Those eyes were not Suguru's, but realization dawned too late. The prison realm's gate yawned open like the maw of an abyss, and Satoru felt his limbs grow heavy as his cursed energy was sealed away. True to his character, even as this happened, Gojo remained outwardly calm. He did not thrash or scream. Instead, he took a deep breath, regaining composure. "So this is your plan," he said softly, casting a final look around. He saw Jogo's gleeful expression, Choso's stern gaze, and the imposter Geto's cold smile. He also saw the unconscious civilians, safe for now, and thought of his students outside, undoubtedly working on trying to break in or rescue others. He had done what he could. The rest would be up to them. With a hint of a smirk on his face, as though to say, "You've caught me for now, but it's not over," Satoru Gojo, the honored one, allowed the darkness of the prison realm to envelop him completely. The cube snapped shut, falling to the ground with a dull thud. Inside it, infinite nothingness. Outside the veil, when Gojo's presence vanished, Yuji, Megumi and their allies felt a gut-wrenching alarm. Communications from inside relayed the worst. "Gojo has been sealed." It was unthinkable, and yet it had happened. Shibuya erupted into further chaos as sorcerers raced to recover the prison realm and deal with the now leaderless curses running amok. Inside the prison realm, time and space meant little. Satoru sat, or perhaps floated, in a void of endless dark, his senses cut off from the outside. The moment he was sealed, he had closed his eyes and centered himself in a meditative state. He recalled the words of his dear friend, Yuta's ancestor, that those with the six eyes might perceive even sealed energy. In this silent emptiness, Satoru's thoughts inevitably wandered. He thought of Suguru Geto, the real one, hoped that perhaps his soul had found peace, and that whatever wore his face outside would answer for its manipulations. He thought of his students, Yuji's bright optimism, Megumi's steadfast resolve, Nobara's fiery determination, Yuta's earnest heart, Maki's iron will, Panda's humor, Toga's kindness. A small smile tugged at his lips in the darkness as he imagined them working together, carrying on the fight in his absence. Gojo had the utmost faith in them. In fact, he found solace, knowing that if anyone could figure out how to free him or adapt to a world without him in the interim, it was that new generation. They were his legacy and his hope. In the stillness, a memory came to Satoru, the voices of his students from a training afternoon not long ago. "We'll get strong, Gojo-sensei, so you can rely on us too," Yuji had declared after a sparring session, sweat on his brow but a grin on his face. "Yeah, you better not hog all the spotlight forever," Nobara had chimed in, to which Megumi simply nodded firmly. Gojo chuckled at the recollection, the sound echoing strangely in the void. Even sealed, Gojo did not despair. Instead, he embraced a rare moment of rest. He allowed himself to trust that his comrades outside would find a way to handle things. Perhaps this was another trial fate put before him to test his beliefs. If nothing else, this forced pause granted him time to reflect, something he seldom got in his hectic life. And reflect he did on his life's journey, on the vow he made to nurture a better future, and on the subtle warmth that filled him, knowing he wasn't alone in that vision anymore. As hours or perhaps days passed in that timeless prison, Satoru remained patient. He meditated, he napped, he joked to himself that he'd finally catch up on sleep debt. A very Gojo thought, even in captivity, and he occasionally hummed a tune into the quiet. An old lullaby his mother once hummed to him when he was very little. A memory almost lost to time, yet found now in this solitude. Outside, the world reeled from the Shibuya incident's aftermath. But inside, Gojo's resolve only hardened gently, like steel cooling to tempered glass. He would be free one day. Of that he was certain. Whether by his own wit or his allies' success, the story of Satoru Gojo was far from over. And in that certainty, he found peace. He imagined walking freely under the open sky again. The first thing he'd do, likely tease his students by acting like it was no big deal, and then treat them to a lavish meal as promised. He thought of Megumi, and how the boy would pretend to scold him for being reckless, even as his eyes would show relief. He thought of Yuji, who'd undoubtedly smile ear to ear, and maybe even cry a bit while trying not to show it. Nobara would smack Gojo's arm and say, "What took you so long, sensei?" Panda would probably attempt a hug, and Maki would just give a satisfied grunt of acknowledgement. The very thought of these reunions warmed Gojo's heart in the darkness. Back in the real world, night deepened over Tokyo. The Shibuya incident would mark a dark chapter in Jujutsu history, but from it, new heroes would rise and lessons would be learned. In the immediate aftermath, the students and other sorcerers indeed rallied. They suffered losses and pain, but they persevered, inspired by Gojo's teachings and the foundation he laid. Yuji Itadori took on burdens and battles with renewed conviction. Megumi Fushiguro stepped into a leadership role he never wanted but accepted for the greater good. And allies like Yuta, Maki, and even the Kyoto students all came together to fill the void left by Gojo's absence. They all held one hope in their hearts, to free Satoru Gojo and have their mentor back. Within the prison realm, Satoru suddenly felt a faint stir, a connection. a tug at his soul. It felt like the echoes of his name called by familiar voices. Perhaps it was merely his imagination or hope, but he smiled and responded softly into the emptiness. I'm here. I'll be waiting. The bond he shared with his students and friends transcended physical barriers. It was a light in the dark. And so, in that suspended silence, Satoru Gojo waited, not in despair, but in calm faith. He knew dawn follows even the longest night. For now he rested, gathering his strength, replaying fond memories to keep his spirit company. The world outside continued spinning, but within the prison realm time was his ally. Satoru's thoughts drifted like clouds across a sky of memories, until he found himself envisioning a quiet scene, a sunny day at Jujutsu High, with his students laughing, the promise of a bright future unmarred by fear. He focused on that image, cherished it, and allowed it to lull him into a tranquil state. There, in the gentle darkness, Gojo Satoru, the strongest sorcerer, the beloved teacher, the indomitable spirit, closed his eyes and let the weight of the world slip from his shoulders for just a moment. Outside, his students would carry on his will. Inside, he nurtured a garden of resolve and hope. Eventually, the time for action would come again, and he would emerge as brilliant and kind as ever. Until then, the story of Gojo Satoru would lie in a peaceful interlude. Even sealed in a cube of eternal night, Gojo's presence was like a star behind clouds, hidden from view, yet still there, shining quietly. The world slept, healing from chaos, and many out there whispered prayers for their hero's return. And though he couldn't hear them, perhaps in a dream, Satoru felt those wishes. He remained seated in meditation, a faint smile on his lips, and in his heart, he held on to the serene knowledge that this was not the end of his story, merely a pause. Outside, midnight passed, and the first gentle light of a new day began to touch the horizon. One day, sooner or later, Gojo would see the sunrise again, with his own eyes. Until that dawn, the strongest sorcerer rested in a cradle of darkness. At peace, his story whispered in the quiet, living on in the hearts of those he inspired. And if one listened closely in the stillness, they might almost hear Satoru Gojo humming a soft tune to himself, a lullaby in the dark, as the world around him slowly drifted into a safer, more hopeful sleep. In the endless night, even as we drift to sleep, the story of Gojo Satoru continues, calm, unbroken, and full of light awaiting its moment to shine again.